Eric Nelson, and this is my narrative report for Fundamentals of Oral Communication. The title is You Know There's No Santa Claus, right? Well, when I was younger, my parents always told me that my older brother Kurt had seen Santa Claus's sleigh flying through the night sky years ago when he was a child. I was 5 or 6 at the time and was totally hyped at the fact that my older brother saw Santa Claus. I held on to that story and would tell it to all of my friends. Anyone, in fact, who would listen. I preached it day and night, especially around Christmas time. He was able to tell that he saw Santa Claus because he could see his Rudolph's nose flashing in the night sky. Well, when you hear that, you're pretty much gonna believe that there is a Santa Claus. So I told my friends, and they told their friends. And being 5 and 6 years old, we all would just get together around Christmas and just start rehashing that story that I heard. Well, then my brother Steve came up one day and said, "You know, there's no Santa Claus." Well, that didn't go over too well with my mother. She was furious. So she wasn't going to have any of that talk, and neither was I. I called him a liar, and my mother said, "Well, he is, so we're going to go to the mall, and he's going to have to apologize to Santa Claus." Well, my mother marched my brother and me down to the local mall, and he had to apologize to Santa Claus in front of the whole mall, with me watching and my mother with her arms folded, nodding disapprovingly at him the whole time. Well, how could she get this done? Well, the Santa Claus just happened to be a friend of my father's, a lifelong friend, and he went along with it and made sure that I could hear that my brother was not very nice for having said that to me, and that to tell a child that there is no Santa Claus is one of the worst things you can do. So my brother apologized. He got off his lap and says, "I'm sorry." Looked up at his mom, or my mother actually, and said, "I'm sorry." And she says, "Okay." And we marched off back to the house. Of course, my brother was just trying to make sure that he would keep all of his presents for that year and not get a lump of coal, as my mother kept hinting all the way up until Christmas night. Well, several years passed, and I was 9 or 10, I believe, and I was starting to believe that there wasn't a Santa Claus anymore. But then it hit my mother's ear again that I might be thinking, well, how could Santa Claus come down the chimney, Mom? He can't do that. And magic isn't real. Well, my mother again wasn't going to have any of that. I later found out that it was her, by the way, that had snuck into my room that Christmas Eve. Her arm slowly coming through the door, and it was red, and it had puffs of white around the edge. She'd gotten one of those, made herself a Santa Claus arm, and that was the only part I saw in the night. It came in my room, pulled the stocking off, pulled the stocking out of the room, and then I heard all the crumpling and everything of toys and stuff being put into the stocking, and then it came back in, placed the stocking back up on my door. Well, of course, I was set again for another couple years believing that Santa Claus was real. And then, about the time I was 11 or 12, my father, out of the blue, just looked at me and said, "You know there's no Santa Claus, right?" And I was kind of like, yeah. Yeah, I know there's no Santa Claus. And my mother wasn't too happy about that, and things were a little chilly between them for that year, because I think she wanted her little boy, her last little boy, to still think there was a Santa Claus. So that's the story of how I found out there wasn't a Santa Claus.